Joel Osteen had faced thousands of interviews in his life. Politicians, celebrities, theologians, journalists. All of them had tried to corner him at least once. And Joel always escaped with the same polished smile, the same soft tone, the same effortless charm that made him America's most recognizable pastor. But on this night, in a studio glowing with lights and humming with millions of viewers, he was about to make the one mistake he had avoided his entire career. He was about to challenge Jasmine Crockett. What he didn't know was that Jasmine had walked onto that stage carrying something Joel didn't expect. A truth so sharp, so precise, and so perfectly timed that it would break the rhythm of his rehearsed answers and leave him frozen on live television. The moment happened fast. Joel leaned back in his chair, crossed his hands, smiled softly, and delivered a question he believed would dismantle Jasmine's credibility in front of America. It was calm, beautifully structured, strategically layered, a question designed to trap her. But nobody, not even Joel, was prepared for what Jasmine would say next. Because in just a few seconds, she would destroy his entire argument. Not with anger, not with theatrics, but with a sentence so elegantly devastating that it would stop the entire studio. Even the producers backstage would stop breathing. And the strange thing? When Jasmine opened her mouth to answer, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't change her tone. She didn't even move in her chair. But something in her eyes, a rare mix of compassion and steel, hinted that she had come with a purpose Joel was completely unaware of. That purpose was about to reshape the conversation, rewrite the tone of the broadcast, and send shockwaves through communities across the country. Millions would watch the clip. Thousands would replay it in slow motion. And the moment would become one of the most discussed televised confrontations of the year. But before we get to Jasmine's devastating sentence, there's something you must understand. Something that happened long before the cameras ever turned on. A hidden detail that explains everything. And revealing it changes the meaning of this entire confrontation. But that hidden detail will only make sense after you see how this story begins. Long before Joel and Jasmine ever sat across from each other, the conversation had already begun. In people's living rooms, in quiet prayers, in stressed families trying to hold together lives stretched too thin. Jasmine had been receiving letters for months. From mothers working 2 jobs who gave donations hoping for a turnaround. From young couples struggling with debt. From elderly believers trying to stay hopeful even when life felt heavier than their faith could carry. These weren't people lacking belief. They were people searching for strength. They followed televised messages that promised transformation, abundance, victory. Uplifting messages, yes, but often simplified into a single theme. Good things happen if you expect them. Hard times disappear if you believe hard enough. And Jasmine, who had always been vocal about integrity, had watched these stories pile up. She had no anger toward Joel, no personal issues, no desire to embarrass anyone. That wasn't her nature. But she couldn't ignore the emotional weight of the people writing to her. She understood something deeply. If the conversation on the show didn't change, their struggles wouldn't either. That was the real stake. Not winning a debate. Not scoring a viral moment. Not proving someone wrong. It was about making sure people didn't blame themselves for circumstances beyond their control. But something much bigger was at stake too. Something that would soon escalate into the moment seen around the world. And Jasmine didn't yet know that Joel's team had prepared a plan specifically for her. Keep watching, because what comes next shifts the entire energy of the story. Before we continue, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. This story is about to take a turn no one expected. Jasmine Crockett's rise was never traditional. She didn't grow up imagining she'd be sitting across from the most recognizable faith leader in America. She never planned to debate anyone. But her voice, thoughtful, firm, articulate, had turned her into someone people trusted when they were confused or hurting. So when the producers invited her, they assumed she would soften the conversation. They assumed she'd bring nuance. They assumed she'd balance the show with calm professionalism. They did not assume she'd challenge core assumptions. Joel, meanwhile, had built an empire of optimism. His messages were famously gentle. His tone was famously relaxed. He avoided political battles, avoided arguments, avoided confrontation entirely. But that night, sitting across from Jasmine, he decided to make an exception. Why? Because Jasmine's influence had grown more rapidly than anyone expected. She had been speaking openly about personal responsibility, community accountability, and inner resilience. Themes that some believed undermined Joel's more motivational approach. So his team crafted a question. One question. Calm. Measured. Designed to press Jasmine into a corner. They believed. If she agreed, she'd contradict her own values. If she disagreed, viewers would see her as critical or dismissive. Either way, they thought Joel would appear wiser, fairer, and more grounded. But there was something his team didn't consider. Jasmine wasn't coming to win. She wasn't coming to attack. She wasn't coming to prove a point. She was coming for one reason: to speak to the people who had written to her, the people who felt unseen. And when the cameras finally rolled, the contrast between Joel's polished confidence and Jasmine's quiet determination created a tension unlike anything the show had ever aired. The collision of their two perspectives was no longer hypothetical. It was seconds away. But what Jasmine didn't know was that Joel's trap question had already been rehearsed backstage, and it was about to be delivered with precision. The lights brightened, the audience settled, and Joel leaned forward with his signature gentle smile. "Jasmine," he began warmly, "you talk a lot about resilience and struggle, but wouldn't you agree that true faith is about expecting good things? Believing in abundance? Trusting that positivity brings prosperity?" The studio nodded. The question felt harmless. Polite, encouraging, but Jasmine instantly recognized the structure. This wasn't a question. It was a funnel, a narrowing doorway designed to box her into a single yes or no. If she agreed, she'd appear inconsistent with her own principles. If she disagreed, she'd appear pessimistic, harsh, or ungrateful. Joel continued gently, layering his framing. People watching at home might be facing hard times. Don't you think reminding them that good things are coming is the most loving thing we can do? The audience applauded. Producers smiled. Joel sat back, satisfied. He believed he had positioned himself as the beacon of hope, and Jasmine as the skeptic. But Jasmine remained still. Not defensive. Not shaken. Just thoughtful. She took a breath. And that moment, a pause barely 2 seconds long, shifted the room. Because the confidence in Joel's eyes flickered. Just once. Almost invisible, as if he sensed for the first time that the answer he expected was not the answer coming. Jasmine clasped her hands gently, leaned forward, and spoke with a calmness that carried more weight than volume. But she didn't reveal her full response. Not yet. She started by thanking Joel. She acknowledged the intention behind his message. She validated the purpose of uplifting people. But then, she began guiding the conversation somewhere Joel never intended it to go. It was subtle at first, a shift in logic. Then it sharpened, a shift in accountability. Then it deepened, a shift in reality. And just as Joel prepared to interrupt, Jasmine delivered a phrase that made even the audience hold their breath. But that phrase, the one that destroys his argument, you're about to hear it. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. What happens next is the exact moment this story went viral. Jasmine's voice didn't rise. She didn't shift in her chair. She didn't even blink differently. Her tone remained calm, almost impossibly calm for a moment carrying so much weight. But her words, every single one, landed with the clarity of something that had been waiting to be spoken for years. "Joel," she began gently, "expecting good things is beautiful. It really is. But telling people that positivity guarantees prosperity is a promise reality doesn't support." A ripple of stillness swept across the studio. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was the kind of silence that comes when everyone suddenly realizes they're hearing something they were never meant to overlook. Joel blinked once. Then again. Slower. The smile that usually held an entire audience together softened by a fraction. Almost invisible, unless you were looking closely. Jasmine continued, her voice now carrying the rhythm of lived experience. "I've met families who trust deeply, who pray sincerely, who work tirelessly, and still struggle. Not because they're negative, not because they lack faith, but because life doesn't punish or reward based on how loudly we smile." This time, the audience didn't simply fall silent, they leaned in. Because Jasmine wasn't arguing. She wasn't pushing back. She wasn't even debating. She was describing the lives of people watching from home. Joel's smile tightened at the edges. His browsing expression flickered, an almost invisible flash, but it was there. And then, without raising her voice or breaking her tone, Jasmine delivered the sentence that would replay online millions of times, dissected in slow-motion clips and reaction videos for weeks. If positivity alone determined prosperity, then the hardest struggles in the world would belong to people with the weakest hearts, and we both know that's simply not true. The studio froze. It was as if the temperature dropped 3 degrees. Nobody clapped. Nobody gasped. Nobody moved. They didn't need to. The weight of her words moved for them. Because Jasmine hadn't attacked Joel. She hadn't insulted him. She hadn't contradicted his beliefs or questioned his good intentions. She had simply held up a mirror, gently, respectfully, but unmistakably. A mirror that reflected a flaw in the very logic of the question Joel had crafted to corner her. A flaw so simple, so human, so undeniable, that it left Joel with nothing to stand on. He opened his mouth to respond. Paused. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing. Not a sentence. Not a phrase. Not even a filler word. He just stared at her, searching for the language he had always had. Language he had never once been without. But tonight it wasn't there. Producers behind the glass wall froze mid-gesture. Technicians exchanged anxious looks. Cameras instinctively zoomed tighter, as if trying to capture the exact moment a practiced script fell apart. Jasmine didn't lean back triumphantly. She didn't smirk. She didn't even shift her shoulders. She simply added, almost in a whisper, "People need hope, yes, but they also need honesty." A soft murmur spread across the studio. Confusion, realization, reflection all blending at once. This wasn't a takedown. This wasn't a verbal knockout. This was clarity. Elegant. Measured. Unavoidable. And in those few seconds, Joel's entire argument, his carefully crafted trap, dissolved before he could even defend it. But the moment wasn't over. Not even close. Because something happened next that no one, not the producers, not the audience, not even Jasmine herself, saw coming. Something that turned this quiet exchange into the most replayed moment of the entire broadcast. It started with the one thing Joel Osteen had never done on live TV. He went silent. 5 seconds. That's how long Joel stayed silent after Jasmine finished her sentence. Just 5 seconds. But they stretched across the studio like a thin sheet of glass ready to crack. He looked at Jasmine, then at the audience, then down at his notes, then back at Jasmine again. Every shift of his eyes felt slower than the last, as if he was moving through air that had suddenly thickened. And with every passing second, the studio grew heavier. People shifted in their chairs but didn't dare make noise. The lights hummed louder, a faint mechanical sound no one ever noticed until now. Even the air felt still, as if the room itself was holding its breath with Joel. Because this wasn't a dramatic pause. This wasn't staged tension. This wasn't the kind of silence a host uses to build anticipation. This was different. This was a man who had spent his entire career answering everything, suddenly unable to answer anything. 10 seconds now. Jasmine remained calm, patient, unmoved. Her expression didn't gloat. Her posture didn't change. Her hands remained gently folded. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush him. She didn't fill the silence with additional commentary. She simply let honesty sit between them, an honesty that didn't accuse, didn't attack, didn't shame. It just existed. And that alone made the silence louder. 15 seconds. The audience began whispering. Small glances. Soft murmurs. Confused frowns. Some looked at Joel as if waiting for a comeback. Others looked at Jasmine as if seeing her in a new light entirely. 20 seconds. A producer discreetly motioned to cut to commercial. A second producer raised a hand to agree. But the director, eyes locked on the screen, shook his head sharply. They knew something historic was happening. A moment too real to interrupt. A moment that needed to breathe. 25 seconds. Someone in the audience gasped softly. A tiny sound, but unmistakable in the thick quiet. 30 seconds. Joel's smile faded completely. Not softened. Not shifted. Not adjusted. Faded. For the first time in the entire broadcast, the expression he was known for, the expression millions recognized, instantly vanished. 35 seconds. His breathing changed. Not dramatically, but subtly. The way it does when someone realizes they're standing face to face with a truth they can't sidestep. 37 seconds. Finally, Joel exhaled, leaned slightly forward, and whispered into the microphone. "I don't know how to respond to that." That was it. A sentence so human, so unpolished, so unexpectedly vulnerable, that it broke the internet. Within an hour, clips went viral across every major platform. Hashtags erupted worldwide. Comment sections flooded with reactions ranging from awe to reflection. Faith communities debated the meaning of the silence. TV networks replayed the clip, frame by frame, analyzing every second. Not because Jasmine humiliated him. She didn't. Not because Joel was defeated. He wasn't. It was because Jasmine held her ground, with grace, truth, and empathy, and invited a deeper, harder, more honest conversation than anyone expected. And Joel, for the first time, allowed himself to sit in that honesty openly. What happened next would determine the legacy of this confrontation. Not just for Joel, not just for Jasmine, but for everyone watching who suddenly saw themselves in the silence. Before we move to the final chapter, hit like and subscribe, because what comes next reveals the part of this story almost no one knows. The moment the show cut to its final frame, the studio erupted into movement. Producers rushed toward the stage from every direction, their headsets buzzing with overlapping voices. Crew members hurried to secure cables, stage managers waved camera operators into new positions, and assistants whispered frantic updates as the audience began to rise in a stunned, uneven wave. Some producers quietly congratulated Jasmine, not loudly, not proudly, but with a subtle nod or a hand on her shoulder. They knew she had said something rare. Truth that didn't wound, clarity that didn't judge. Others moved straight toward Joel, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Not angry, not dismissive, just uncertain. Unsure of how the internet would react to the 37 seconds of silence that would soon become the heartbeat of the episode. And then, behind the curtains where cameras no longer reached, something unexpected happened. Joel approached Jasmine. There was no hostility in his expression, no defensiveness, no frustration. Only sincerity, the kind that comes when someone realizes a conversation touched deeper than intended. I didn't expect that, he said quietly. I think I needed to hear it. Jasmine didn't correct him. She didn't frame her words as victory. She didn't position herself above him. Instead, she simply replied, "People look to us for honesty. And honesty sometimes requires courage neither of us expects." Joel nodded slowly. Not in defeat, but in reflection. For the next 15 minutes, the two of them talked backstage. Not on camera. Not for a headline. Not for applause. It was a deeply human exchange, thoughtful, respectful, vulnerable. And while they talked, the digital world outside the studio had already caught fire. Within minutes, the internet surged with reactions. People didn't praise Jasmine because she won. They praised her because she delivered truth without cruelty, strength without aggression, conviction without attack. And surprisingly, people praised Joel too, because he listened, because he paused, because he allowed silence instead of forcing a scripted answer. Across the country, conversations began shifting. Families started embracing grace instead of guilt. Viewers realized that hard seasons don't equal personal failure. Communities found comfort in acknowledging vulnerability instead of hiding it. Faith leaders began discussing the difference between optimism and authenticity, and why both matter. That was the real power of the moment. Not the confrontation, not the tension, not the viral clip itself, but transformation. The reminder that strong conversations aren't meant to divide us. They're meant to reveal what we often hide behind our smiles. So now, as you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, which voice are you following? The voice that tells you everything will always be easy? Or the voice that reminds you that your worth isn't measured by your circumstances? Sometimes the most important truth is the one that challenges us. And sometimes the most meaningful courage is the one spoken gently, but refuses to stay silent. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and comment below. Should conversations like this happen more often on live television?